Welcome to Faith is the Podcast.
Great to be here.
Today, we're diving into something really central to Christian faith, the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely.
We'll be looking at some insights from Pastor Chris Oyakhilome's message, Know and Talk to the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, it's a fascinating perspective.
And, you know, when we think about Jesus' gift of salvation, that incredible act well, understanding the Holy Spirit feels like unlocking the door to really experiencing all that gift offers.
That's a really good way to put it. It's not just the getting saved part.
Exactly. It's about living in that fullness.
Well, Pastor Chris, he kind of starts by looking back, at the Old Testament. He mentions how individuals could do great things, like one chasing 1,000.
Right.
But then he quickly brings it to today, saying our mission is different. It's about winning people spiritually. And he asks us this core question. Can you actually, rely on the Holy Spirit day to day for that?
Okay, yeah, that's foundational. And Pastor Chris makes this really powerful statement early on, explaining the Holy Spirit was right there in creation. He says the Spirit made the world and made the Word. He calls the Spirit the doer of God's work.
Yeah, the active agent.
So right from the start, we're talking about an active, powerful presence, not just some, abstract idea.
Exactly. And then he looks at Jesus's life. Pastor Chris draws this interesting parallel. Jesus called God my Father in heaven, right?
Right.
But he also talked about the Holy Spirit in a way that suggests, a similarly close relationship. Pastor Chris points to Matthew 1:18, Jesus conceived by the Holy Spirit.
Wow. Yeah, that really makes you think about how intimate that connection was.
It does.
And here's something really thought-provoking. Pastor Chris quotes Jesus, "My Father which dwelleth in me, he doeth the works." And Pastor Chris identifies that indwelling presence as the Holy Spirit. He emphasizes that Jesus' miracles weren't just his own power, but the Spirit living in him.
Like the engine behind the ministry.
Yeah, almost like the Holy Spirit was the active force. And he reminds us of Acts 10:382. God anointed Jesus with the Holy Spirit and power, and then he went about doing good, healing.
Right, empowered by the Spirit. And what's fascinating is how Pastor Chris clarifies what Holy Spirit even means. He says it's not a name like Jesus.
Yeah.
Spirit and holy, there's descriptive terms for God.
Yeah.
He stresses the Holy Spirit is the third person of the Godhead, the Trinity.
The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Exactly. The one who brings God's presence and power into our lives. He calls the Spirit the angel of God's presence, making Jesus real to us, helping us get the word.
So how do we wrap our heads around that? Pastor Chris uses this image. Picture a chair, God on his throne.
Okay.
Now, while God's there, his Spirit, the Holy Spirit, can be actively working everywhere else at once, fixing things, doing God's will.
Like God's influence extending everywhere through the Spirit without him having to physically move. Yeah.
It's a helpful picture.
And this fits with the idea that the Spirit proceeds from the Father, like Jesus said. Pastor Chris highlights that even though the Spirit acts independently for God's purposes, he's totally unified with the Father, which helps explain how the Holy Spirit can be fully present in each believer. It's not like we get a little piece, we get the fullness.
That is a powerful thought. Something for listeners to really consider. Because of this indwelling Spirit, Pastor Chris suggests believers are in a place of absolute mastery, that we're absolutely undefeated, unconquerable. His point is, often it's not about needing more power,
but recognizing what we already have.
Exactly. Growing in awareness of the power already inside us through the Spirit.
Which really leads to a personal question, doesn't it, for you listening? Are you conscious of this power Pastor Chris talks about right there inside you?
Yeah.
He also talks about the charisma, the gifts, the graces the Spirit gives out, according to God's wisdom.
Like when the word is shared effectively.
Right. That's the Spirit enabling the speaker and the listener to get those spiritual truths. And when he says charisma, he means the specific gifts, teaching, healing, faith.
Okay. And he does talk about spiritual healing quite a bit, mentioning the healing schools in South Africa, Nigeria.
Share some incredible stories.
Things that might sound unbelievable to some. But Pastor Chris is firm. These are real demonstrations of God's power through the Spirit. And he insists people can be taught how to receive divine healing.
Yeah, that these spiritual realities are just as real as the physical. We can understand and access them.
That emphasis on learning, on actively receiving, is interesting. It's not just random power surges.
It's something we can learn to connect with. He even mentions seemingly small things, like lifting a hand a certain way for a blessing.
Suggesting there are little secrets the Spirit reveals.
Yeah, in the Bible.
Finally, Pastor Chris really emphasizes the local church community. He uses that analogy of a child without a stable home, wandering, instability.
He stresses being nurtured in a church, contrasts it with someone lacking that foundation. He strongly encourages being active in a church, specifically mentioning Christ Embassy.
Right.
He clarifies, you can get teaching anywhere, but the personal care, the spiritual growth in a local church, that's essential. Absolutely, and bringing it full circle back to experiencing salvation fully.
Yeah.
Pastor Chris's teaching suggests that engaging with the Holy Spirit, understanding him, recognizing him in us, being part of that church community well, that's vital to unlocking the richness of that gift.
It's not just a one-off decision.
No, it's an ongoing relationship, a journey of discovery.
Well, this has been really insightful, exploring Pastor Chris Oyakhilome's teachings on the Holy Spirit and how it connects to the fullness of salvation.
Definitely food for thought.
We do want to take a moment and give a sincere thank you to Business Referred for sponsoring Faith is the Podcast.
Yes, thank you.
If you're a local business looking for advertising opportunities, you can reach out to them at info@businessreferred.com.
It certainly gives us a lot to reflect on, doesn't it? Thinking about that dynamic, powerful presence of the Holy Spirit in a believer's life.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive on Faith is the Podcast.